Hello, and welcome to my AP Research presentation. I am Edwin, and I chose to conduct a study into urban design and transportation planning. My inspiration for my topic was born out of a common problem. I was stuck in traffic, and it was hot. And as the weary AC in my 2007 Jetta booted up, I thought that there must be a better way of getting around town than with cars. So how would we get around without cars? Cars pollute. They consume resources, and as I found out, they lead to a very distinct phenomenon in urban areas. As automobiles came to prominence in 20th century America, cities began to build themselves with automobiles in mind. Large highways were built directly through historic neighborhoods and downtowns across America. Pictured here is the downtown of Cincinnati, Ohio. And you can clearly see that there's been a highway built directly through the downtown area. And although there has been recent development in these areas to service the two stadiums, before this development, which took place in the past 4 years, it was one large parking lot, used to service and cater to the automobile-centric population. The definition of American life as automobiles came to prominence was that you would live in a house in the suburbs far away from the central city and connect to the city, to the shopping centers and the working centers with a car and a road. Now the problem with that is that it simply isn't sustainable. It's damaging to the environment, and it creates a reliance that builds up traffic problems and other sorts of development issues that generally make a dysfunctional city. But what would be the alternative to cars? We use cars so much that it's hard to imagine what life would be without them. I propose that in the alternative to an automobile-centric city, we focus on a citizen-centric city. When a city designs itself on an auto-centric plan, its hope is probably to make transportation easier for both the movement of materials and the movement of people, as vehicular transportation with automobiles is generally both trucks and individual cars. Now, a straightforward approach is something that we will later define as the traveler-destination relationship. Now, a citizen-centric city takes a different approach to the traveler-destination relationship. With citizen-centric planning, the citizen is put first before the automobile, and the city takes a more direct role in taking the citizens from where they are to where they need to be and back again. And of course, they aim to do this through public transportation. Now, public transportation is mainly and primarily for the transportation of citizens themselves, not materials. Materials would still rely upon vehicular transportation. Now, in this study, there will be certain terms that are exclusive to this study and will be exclusive to the topic as well, that should be first defined for an ease of understanding. Our first one should be urbanism, which is a general study of how urban areas function and how they interact with the environment. But it could also be used as a philosophy that supports a greater urban density and planning. It's a way of life, it's a philosophy, it's an idea. Now, auto-centric planning, as I've said before, is a phenomenon of urban planning that focuses on easing, promoting, and continuing the predominant use of automobiles. Now, sprawl is kind of a consequence of auto-centric planning. It is a phenomenon in which development is kept low density, with a large use of the available land. And they prevent taller buildings, and they use instead larger avenues and large subdivisions. Good examples and infamous examples are Los Angeles, California, and Phoenix, Arizona, two of the 10 most populated urban areas within the United States, however, with some of the least density of any city within the United States. There's also what we would define as a functional city, and that is a multifaceted term that basically means that it's It's a city that hopes to maintain and support the prosperity, health, and happiness of its citizens, the well-being of its environment, and its own sustainability for the future, meaning that in the future it's able to change and it's able to work well and make things generally easier. Now, this is probably the most important definition for this study, is the traveler destination impact, or relationship, or principle. It is an effect behind all public transportation. Simply, the more people that are able to be taken to more destinations, the greater impact it will have on the effectiveness of the city. It's an umbrella truth that travelers need to get to their destination. This is why taking workers to their jobs, this means taking workers to their jobs, to different shopping centers so they can get what they need to live, and then back home so that they can go to sleep, get up, and do the cycle again. It's a general thing, but it's the basis and the backbone behind all transportation. Now, part of the literature that I reviewed during the course of study, I grouped together a few key sources. These groups will help further an understanding of the different forces behind public transportation and urban life as a whole. These two, pictured on screen, were noted for their philosophical aspect on urbanism. Stephen Marshall wrote stuff on new urbanism, which, as it says there, is a guiding force for urban development at all scales, a blend of architectural styles and anti-sprawl, smart growth, and transit-oriented, sustainable urbanism. Now, the other one is something called deadline urbanism, and we will revisit deadline urbanism as I talk about a mentorship that I had during my research. Now, what deadline urbanism is for now is a method of urban development that focuses on building a lot very quickly. You have a center and a mission, and you get it done very quickly. Now, the problem with that is that it's not incremental. It's instant. And oftentimes, the instant construction could have detrimental future effects, as it's often hurried. Nevertheless, it should be acknowledged as a common part of modern urban design. A lot of firms go for a more flashy and more quick, instant deadline urbanism model. The term deadline means they have to get it done by a deadline. Think Olympic villages and things like that. Now, the lion's share of research was done about the ethical and socio-political side of this transportation planning. The three sources that are pictured on screen all had different bends to them, but they come together to formulate the idea that citizens of a metropolitan area, especially ones with lower incomes, need the ability to get to their jobs, to get their necessities, and to get back to their homes. And they need to be able to do it as cheaply and as easily as possible. These all support the idea that the current automobile-centric economy in America is unfairly stacked against these lower-income groups, as it puts the necessity of owning an automobile puts an unfair, heavy burden upon the low-income groups. They need to buy one, they need to buy insurance, and they need to continually buy gas and maintain the automobile. Now, these support the theory behind the traveler-destination relationship, as I've been saying. And they explain it well. The Torrens, Paul M. Torrens, in Simulating Sprawl, connects it well to the modern American system of society. Essentially, highways were built up as a system to let vehicles take over, or automobiles take over that traveler-destination relationship. They were a replacement to large freight trains and a replacement to passenger trains as well. It's easier to just build a highway and let different companies take things from A to B than to build railroads and have trains take things from A to B. Pekarsky and Johnson in American Transportation and Transition detail how industrialization and the further industrialization of modern society has changed our basic systems of labor. Whereas before the Industrial Revolution, most of the workers would be spread out over a large agrarian area, the Industrial Revolution and the Post-Industrial Revolution is all greatly concentrated within one single area. Essentially, The Industrial Revolution in our modern society requires some form of transportation to bring workers to where they need to work, because a central area is where labor takes place. Now, this portion of literature review was concentrated with a proper implementation of citizen-centered planning. Naomi Wish, in improving policymaking in public transportation, she went into public opinion and found that generally public transportation ought to become further reaching and safer and easier to use, but it should not simply destroy the existing automotive transportation. Glenn Yago, in the Sociology of Transportation, says that the directed and well-designed development of it, civic responsibility and diversity in both economic and ethnic group, both correlate with a higher level of public transportation quality, participation, and opinion. And Wilbur S. Smith, in Interactions Between Transportation and High-Rise, High-Density Living, the less densely populated an area is, the greater the desire for public transportation. This is an important concept that we will revisit as we examine a case study done in the Cincinnati metropolitan area and its different proportions and where its populations live. Now, the gap in this research was pretty evident. It became understood that pretty easily that public transportation is the best and most ethical way to build the traveler-destination relationship, and the impact that it has is supportive of citizen-centered planning. The current literature easily was able to understand that, but what the gap in understanding is the how and when to implement these philosophies and principles. All cities are incredibly different, and they have different densities, different stratifications of socioeconomic groups, and different types and availabilities of public transportation. And the gap in understanding is where and when and how it is appropriate to put those sorts of things in. We want to try to fill this gap, and it is imperative that we fill this gap in interest of preventing a misuse of public funds, a misuse of taxpayer money, and there could also be consequences for the future development of a failed project's area. And finally, simply, citizens don't like when their public transportation systems don't work. As it can be seen with much of the public opinion based on the Cincinnati streetcar, as we will later discuss in the case study, it's not well liked because it's not well done. The hypothesis is that a city's functionality is reliant on its systems of public transportation. But more on that is that what this study aims to prove is that public transportation needs to be specifically tailored to each city with respect to its own traveler-destination relationship in order to be effective. If the public transportation of a city does not reach the appropriate amount of citizens and takes them where they most need to go and back again, then it is simply not an effective, realistic system of public transportation, and it fails to live up to a citizen-centric planning method. Now, in the methodology that I did for the research can be split into three main divisions. There was a further in-depth look into the literature that I reviewed and the qualitative and quantitative evidence that I got from it, the perspectives and lessons that I got from mentorship in the field of urban design, and finally, the case study done on the streetcar project of Cincinnati, Ohio, and Cincinnati, Ohio as a general metropolitan area. This brings together the experience and knowledge from the other two divisions that will come into a final, applicable truth. Now, of the literature methodology in the qualitative department, two general trends and parallels were noted to come to certain guidelines. The first is essentially the nature of transportation, and that is moving materials and people from A to B. Moving people is the traveler-destination relationship, and the movement of materials is similar, but since the materials are either being refined or consumed within the city, refined by industry, consumed by commerce, they're not citizens of the city, and they're not really considered part of the traveler-destination relationship. It's pretty unrealistic to think that a subway could transport tons of sheet metal to be refined in Maine. There's also a thing based upon the ethical and the social aspect of removing a reliance on automobiles. This basically means that as we remove a reliance on automobiles and replace it with easier-to-use public transportation, it allows the lower-income groups to rise up and gives them a greater ability to work and contribute to society and possibly generate more wealth for themselves and their future generations. Most of these articles were found using reports and authors. They were reputable and found using JSTOR. However, the sources that were not used from JSTOR were mostly either local news sources or publicly available online. And if they are publicly available online, for example, most of the maps and images, they're not being used to assert any truth, merely to aid in the understanding of a truth that is already supported by observations by experts in the field, including my own observations as part of a mentorship and in the research done in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. Now, quantitatively, it's closely tied to the qualitative. The quantitative source were tied to the streetcar project mostly, and the Cincinnati metropolitan area's population and where the population is. This includes the ridership statistics of the streetcar project and the cost that it had to make it and the potential cost it would take to expand the streetcar project. Of the key authors that I used, they're Marshall, Karski and Johnson, Torrens, Quamey, Mechanic, and Ward and Matthews. They were all reliable and supported an analysis within the fields of urban design and transportation planning. Now, mentorship in the field that I did was with the people from Glaserworks, which is an architecture and urban design firm in downtown Cincinnati. With their help, I attended meetings, designed competitions, and most notably, I helped to complete parking area evaluations for one of the many mini-commerce centers placed around the Cincinnati metropolitan area. This evaluation came to the conclusion that the current city parking recommendations, under current city parking recommendations, there's too much parking being recommended. Commerce centers like O'Brienville and Hyde Park, which are two prosperous centers with many small businesses and high foot traffic, they're able to prosper without, a quote from one of my mentors, oceans worth of asphalt parking. Working within the Cincinnati area also revealed the peripheral nature of Cincinnati's prosperous urban centers. Places like Hyde Park and O'Brienville are not located within the main city center. They're instead located on the outside. And that is an important detail that we will revisit later. Now, the case study of Cincinnati, Ohio, was that it's simply seen as a standard American urban area. It was also looked into the streetcar project that was recently completed in September of 2016 as an example of public transportation and how it could be effective. It was observed as an example as an automobile-centric city, and the traveler destination Cincinnati has little public transportation and a sizable outward sprawl. An analysis of this area was conducted. Observations were also done into the streetcar project, and that is regards to its location and effectiveness, its mode of transportation. Now, the results of this case study was that Cincinnati could simply be characterized as a small city with the history of a big one. It was known for being a center for shipping and industry, with a noticeable feature among the city's architecture that can be definitely dated to the early and later parts of the 19th century, as well as the Art Deco period in the early 20th century. Cincinnati is well connected to all major modes of transportation. It is connected to a river. It is home to a large train station. It is close to an international airport, CBG, and it is connected and is a major hub for highway transportation in the Midwest area of the United States. Now, it has largely expanded its residential areas in the 1980s and 1970s outward away from the city center. This creates a phenomenon of several smaller cities and commerce hubs outside of Cincinnati's main downtown. Now, it was also used as a case study into the traveler destination impact in regards to the Cincinnati Bell Connector. To put it bluntly, the Cincinnati streetcar is simply not good. The Cincinnati Bell Connector is colloquially known as a Cincinnati streetcar. There are many flaws to the system, mostly due to the area that the Cincinnati streetcar is in. The project was inspired by the many light rail, tram, or streetcar projects of other cities such as Portland and Minneapolis. The ridership of the Cincinnati streetcar is noticeably low, and the price to build it was extraordinarily high. As you can see, it cost $102 million to build, and it's only restricted to a rejuvenated, gentrified arts district of OTR, short for Over the Rhine, which is a larger historically low-income area of downtown Cincinnati. In order for the city to expand it and possibly increase the effectiveness and potential ridership of it, it would have to spend an additional $8 million simply to go a little bit northward towards the University of Cincinnati. Ridership has hit a high at only 18,141, but has fallen to an average of 1,664. It is a perfect example of how public transportation is, it can fail, and therefore what it needs to avoid in order for it to succeed. This is a chart of the performance. Now you can see that the blue bars are the actual ridership of the Cincinnati streetcar, and the green line is the target. It is only half the target during 2 months during the first year that it was built, the first 2 months. Ever since then, it has steadily been below regards. Now please note that the negative change in ridership, as you can see on the right side of the graph, is a nearly negative 40% change in ridership. It's safe to say that the Cincinnati streetcar is a complete failure. Now these are the maps of the Cincinnati metropolitan area on the right and the Cincinnati streetcar route on the left. And this will help explain why the Cincinnati streetcar is such a failure. As you can see, there are areas marked with letters A, B, generally C there, and D located here. This area is downtown Cincinnati, and the blue lines represent the route of the streetcar. This area is here, A. Now what this fails to do, what this route fails to do pretty obviously is reach any of the other areas pinpointed by this map. And furthermore, the other smaller commerce centers such as O'Brienville here, Hyde Park here, and Clifton further north with the University of Cincinnati, it also fails to hit those. Most of the populations of this area is office and high-end residential. Now, the results of the literature review, the mentorship work done in the field, and the case study of Cincinnati, Ohio have generally supported the hypothesis that cities need to be smarter with what public transportation they think would work. Because the Cincinnati streetcar doesn't reach any of the main areas of Cincinnati's commerce or population, it could never have and will never, unless it is expanded, reach the required ridership for it to be considered effective. The key behind making citizen-centric cities is being acutely aware of the city's needs and where it needs it, and properly taking change towards an end goal. One of the main things that I learned within my mentorship program is that the most important and effective way to develop a city, especially in regards to public transportation and making it more effective, is incremental change rather than a large, flashy project. The failure of the Cincinnati streetcar is evidence supportive of the hypothesis because it shows that there is truly a traveler destination impact of public transportation. Effective public transportation needs to focus distinctly on getting the people where they need to go. That means all of the people regardless of socioeconomic background or their wealth. Now they need to go to work or school, they need to get to their necessities to shop, and they need to go back to their places. It is not enough to simply have a streetcar in a downtown area filled with office and high-end residential. It needs to be all-encompassing. Now what this means for the future is that understanding how and when to apply these lessons of urbanism and properly making a citizen-centered city will help the United States to organize and plan its cities as they grow, particularly in the new Sun Belt region of the country that is receiving unprecedented urban growth. It needs to become more citizen-centered for the United States to remain a leader in industry, and for the future generations of its citizens to keep the United States as a leader in industry and prosperity. Future research that could be done ought to be done in metropolitan areas of larger sizes, such as New York or Los Angeles. Now those are polar opposites when it comes to public transportation, and then it's also an area in which future research ought to be done. New York has a very effective and world-famous public transportation system, the MTA, while Los Angeles famously has none. And there's also should be done research into possible public transportation in non-urban environments, such as rural areas or suburban areas, to see if there's an effective, cost-efficient way to get people from A to B without these cars in any environment possible. Now, there are many limitations to this research. Mostly it was because of a lack of resources. There can only be an analysis of the Cincinnati, Ohio metropolitan area due to the proximity of it, and there was no ability for traffic analysis of the Cincinnati metropolitan area to be conducted, and that could have assisted with diagnosing and finding the extent to which the traffic and the auto-centric design has affected Cincinnati. An independent population survey or census couldn't be conducted, and an independent commerce and activity survey and analysis could not have been conducted on the areas around Cincinnati and within Cincinnati. Despite this all, it is still a viable and valuable study done into public transportation and what public transportation needs in order to be effective. I'd like to thank definitely GlaserWorks, my teacher, Mr. Dowling, and everyone else who has helped me to complete this research project. These are all the sources that I used.
Awesome, thank you, Edwin. Just one question for you. You kind of mentioned, or you brought up the idea of utilizing your mentor. What would you say was the most valuable source of information your mentor provided you with?
The most valuable source of information that my mentor definitely provided me with was the ability to go out and see the different areas and see how the parking affected. And that's something that I didn't address much in this presentation, but analyzing how much parking is needed is directly related to analyzing the extent to which an auto-centric planning method has affected and rooted itself in the city. We analyzed that mostly the parking is recommended too much, and that it doesn't take much parking in order for an area of a city to be prosperous.
Very good. Thank you.